People pleasing is not kindness. It's a survival strategy that you learned in your childhood in order to feel safe, losing your sense of self. And now it can silently ruin all your relationships. Welcome to the Connection Catalyst podcast, episode number 18. I'm Karolina, the Connection Catalyst, and I'm here to bring you closer to yourself and develop deeper connection with yourself, others, and the whole world around you. Today, we're going to touch upon very important topic of people pleasing because it's so common in relationships. And I'll talk about why this pattern occurs, what caused it, and then how to deal with it, how to see it, and how to navigate through it. Because I used to be people pleaser in the past, and right now I'm not anymore. I know how to state my boundaries, needs, desires, and values. So I'm just gonna share with you how my journey went and the examples from life of how people pleasing plays a role. So, what is people pleasing? It's not really being nice. It's actually a fear based behavior because people pleasers are usually scared of abandonment, scared of rejection, scared of conflict, scared of disapproval. And then this is actually a form of self abandonment and self betrayal. So, if you say, oh, yeah, I'm okay with whatever, and then you inside feel like resistance or resentment, then you know that you're not actually okay with it. So, how is this pattern created in childhood? Well, it's when a parent acts with you more like a little girl acts with a doll rather than with a small human. So, in a way, the parent tells you how to behave, tells you what to wear, tells you what emotions are okay and not okay according to them, and pretty much just directs you in every way to accommodate towards their needs and their desires and completely neglecting your desires and your needs. And so the key kind of points that could have been in childhood is either a parent could be unpredictable and you really need to read the room and then act accordingly. So you need to please. So, for example, you know that, oh, my dad is angry now, but if I act like this and I'm soft and I'm like, oh, daddy, I drew a drawing for you, then he's gonna calm down. Then you're just gonna like want to do it and please him to gain approval and love and peace, right? Or there could be a household with a conditional love. So you're good only when you behave, otherwise, you're not good enough. So only if you do as your parent says, you're okay. But if you have your own opinion, have your own desire, and express it, then you're not enough. Then the love is withdrawn. Then you experience disapproval. And let's remember, for a kid, in order to feel safe, they need to feel approved and loved by parents because otherwise, a kid is not going to survive. So it's whole like survival based strategy for a kid to be a pleaser in order not to lose love and therefore care of the parents, which makes the child alive, right? So then what other factors can play out? Could be a conflict heavy home. So if there is a lot of arguments at home and you want to keep peace, you become this peacemaker. For example, Enneagram number 9. I spoke about Enneagram personality types in previous podcast episode. If someone doesn't know, and you just want to be a mediator, a peacemaker. So as children, we often take things personally, and when our parents fight, we think that it's about us. So then we are doing our best to mitigate all conflicts, and so then we can become a pleaser as a result. And also, another factor is parentification. So when we needed to become a parent for our parent, then we needed to take care of others' emotions more so than, they cared about us. For example, if my mother was sick in childhood, I needed to man up and become a parent, become, adult and take care of her. Or, for example, if there is a single mother, then a son might become like a dad rather than like a son, so then parentification also makes children be a people pleaser because then of course you take the role of, in this case, for example, dad, and you handle everything at home and so on as soon as you're able to do it, which is, I don't know, 6, 7, 10 years old, you already are able to take over some tasks at home and you feel responsibility for your mother's emotions in this case as a son, and then This can lead to people pleasing patterns. And so, what are the core beliefs of people pleasers? For example, if I disappoint people, I'm going to lose connection. People are going to leave me, abandon me. Yeah. Or, for example, my needs and my desires are a burden to other people. Or, I only am worthy of love if I meet others' needs. And so people pleasers put others above themselves. They sacrifice their own needs, desires, values for the sake of others. And it's very, very unhealthy, because if you don't fill up your own cup and you're giving, from the empty one, you're really like betraying yourself. You're abandoning yourself because you say yes to things that you should say no to. And it's a very strong pattern, and it's not that easy to, get out of it, because it requires a lot of subconscious work. But it is possible because I've done it. So I will share with you how. But first, I want to give you an example. So, for example, if lol. If in childhood you learned that expressing anger is bad, because you screamed and then your parents shouted at you for screaming, and you got punished for it, for example, that you had your toys taken away or whatever, then you become like low maintenance almost. You become the good child, the golden child. You become easy to handle in a way. So you don't want to be punished, and therefore you just want to please, and you just want to behave how the parents want you to behave. And also, as we already know from my episode about parts work, parts integration, when a parent is disapproving of us and resisting us, we actually adopt and copy paste their like behaviors and actions and traits into ourselves, so that we can avoid this happening again. So we are pretty much having our internal family inside, our inner dad, inner mom, and inner caregiver if we were not raised by our parents. And then we are actually like our parents. So this part of us will criticize us before the parent gets to do it. The part of us that reflects this parent. Yeah. So, for example, if I don't know, I spilled the tea during breakfast and my mom is shouting at me and criticizing me for that, I will create the part of me that is just like my mom, that will criticize me for any kind of clumsy behavior, so that the next time this part of me inside will tell me not to spill it or to be more mindful or whatever, so that I avoid my mom shouting at me. So that's why we have all these different parts of us that if we want to integrate them, we need to do the process called parts work, which I talked about in previous episode, but also I do this work with my individual clients. And so usually we are identified with the people pleaser part of us, but we also have a narcissistic part of us. And actually everyone has a people pleaser and narcissist inside. But because of childhood experiences, we are more identified with one or the other. But everyone is a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's just the degree of how it happens in our life varies. But people pleasing is also narcissistic. Why? Because it's also, in a way, caring about our own good and our own safety, just like narcissist does. It's just that narcissist does it in a completely different way. But it's the same kind of core, where you take care of yourself and keeping yourself safe by adopting these kind of strategies to cope with it. And I will talk about narcissism in the next episode. But for now, let's just focus on the people pleasing. So, people pleasing is actually like a phone response alongside fight and flight and freeze. So our whole nervous system is scanning, okay, what do I need to do to stay safe? Right? So then we can override our truth and our authentic self for the sake of maintaining connection with the other person. For example, in our adulthood, my partner can say something that makes me really hurt and my body gets tense and so on. But instead of speaking up and saying how I feel and telling him, like, hey, baby, this really hurt my feelings, I shut it down and maybe smile and say, it's fine. And this pattern can oftentimes be like a recipe for disaster, because as people pleasers, we put up with the behaviors of other people that should not be put up with, that should be said no to. And this is how the dynamics also work when people stay with abusive partner. Someone is physically abusive, for example, You see all these women that are beaten up by their men, but they are staying there. Why? Because of these people pleaser tendencies as well. Apart from, feeling like a victim, feeling powerless, feeling like they don't deserve anything more, and so on. But this is all connected to the people pleaser, because usually people pleasers also have quite a low self esteem, and they really feel like, okay, I really need to give myself up and my truth and my authentic self up for the sake of this connection. And they don't realize that this actually creates even more resistance and rupture in a relationship, because if you don't speak out your truth, the person is with your mask and not with your true self. So then you discover incompatibility in relationships, because oftentimes also people pleasers are showing a different version of them, especially at the beginning of relationship, right, where you just want to get the guy or get the girl, and then you are putting your best foot forward. So in early dating especially, it could be overgiving or adapting personality to the other person, or could be avoiding saying what you actually really want to please, right? So for example, you can pretend that you like the band that this other person likes while you don't. It's a pretty mild example, but it could be also the lifestyle, or it could be also the pace of relationship that you actually would like to be different, but then you just adapt to this other person and what they want instead. And then in the middle stage of relationships, it can be something like difficulty expressing your needs and desires, and then building resentment silently, right? Because you don't express what you really want and need. So then it's bubbling inside of you, the resentment, the anger that then is projected onto the other person. And then you can feel unseen, but you don't communicate your needs and desires clearly. So obviously you're unseen and you're not understood, because you don't even say what your truth is. So, for example, you can say yes to meetings when you're completely tired, but then feel drained and irritated. And I've had it in my relationships before, when I was with the Enneagram 3 man, achiever. And when we look at Enneagram, we know that achiever has also a wing of giver. So every high achieving man, or most of them, have this part of them that is the people pleaser, that is the giver, that just wants to please others. And so how it played out in my relationships, multiple actually, because yeah, it happened multiple times, where a man would give me a lot of quality time, because my first love language is quality time. So I love spending time with my partner. And then he wouldn't realize what his needs for space are. And over time, when he spent too much time with me and it became too intense for him, because he didn't have enough self-awareness of his needs and desires and didn't express it and just wanted to please me, he built this resentment and anger. And then he needed to, for example, take the whole week off, where we needed to stay in different places, because he needed so much space for himself suddenly. And if he caught this pattern before, maybe it wouldn't be necessary for him to take so much space, because he wouldn't do it from the place of resentment and anger. And so for me, it triggered my abandonment a lot, because I don't mind people telling me, hey, darling, I need space, and then like separating in love. But I do mind when it's done from this point of, oh my God, I spent so much time with you. Now I need to have my space. And I can feel this resentment and this anger and frustration. But it's not really my fault that you don't know your boundaries and needs, right? So this anger and resentment and frustration was projected onto me, but I didn't even do anything. I was just there wanting to spend time as I usually do. But then, like, because he didn't know himself well and he didn't know his boundaries, I was the one who suffered from it, because he was people pleasing me and I didn't even know about it. And it happened multiple times throughout our relationship, actually, with this person. So beware of this pattern, because it can create a lot of rupture. And like, if you know yourself, if you know how much space or time you need with your partner, like, you can just express it and then just check within yourself, how does your body feel? Is this too intense for me? Is this too much? Or is it too little when it comes to space, right? So it can play out in many different ways, but it could be simple situations. Like, the other day I had the situation with a guy that I'm dating, that I wanted to eat in a specific place and he wanted to stay where we were and eat there. And he was just like, yeah, okay, let's go. But I could feel it's not his truth. So I'm like, hey, baby, you actually want to eat here. Like, I can feel it. Like, we can also stay here. You can eat here. And then we can go to where I want to go. and we eat, and I eat there, right? So, like, sometimes people pleasers don't realize that there is a potential win-win scenario for both, where both people are fulfilled and not only one. and and he was like, yeah, I was like people pleasing, like it kicked in this pattern and so on. And then he ate in this restaurant, and then we moved to the other restaurant where I ate, and everyone was happy, right? But there is the subconscious program that tells you, oh, I can't have what I want and for the other person to have what they want or need, and then I need to give myself up and sacrifice for the sake of the other person, which is just not true, because you can always find a win-win, always find an integration, which is not going to be like 100% of what you initially maybe want, which is, for example, in this case, eating lunch together. But there is a solution always to have both people get what they want and need in some way. So also parts work helps with this a lot. So what about the long-term dynamic when you're a people pleaser? You can completely lose yourself in a relationship. I know this couple where a man is more of a leader and a woman is more of a people pleaser, and she just pretty much does anything that he says, stays at home even though she would like to go to work, takes care of the kid only and doesn't have her own life because she is just pleasing him, because she thinks that he is the only way of how she can get safe financially. So he's pretty much using, finances and money in order to manipulate her to act how he wants and control her. And usually people pleasers are a match to narcissists because it's like the polarity. So unfortunately, this can happen. And then attraction can fade over time because you're not authentic. So how can someone be attracted to you if you're constantly putting masks and like it's not really you who is there? And then you can also become the emotional caretaker. So you can, overtake responsibility for the other person's feelings too much. And yeah, you just might feel like you've completely lost yourself in this dynamic. So one day you can wake up thinking like, I don't know who I am anymore. Like I've completely lost myself. And like I have this friend of mine that I already said this example when I was talking about Enneagram, specifically Enneagram number 9 mediator, where she would like melt into her partner and just take over his life and as her life and completely lose herself, lose her whole life, her goals, her passions, desires, and so on, and just merge with a partner to become the part of his life. And it's very unhealthy because then when you break up potentially, you don't have your own sense of self, your own life, your own center, and your own individuality. And then it's pretty toxic because then you're so dependent, so codependent onto the other person that like it's just screwed pretty much, simply put. And it's very sad to see this dynamic of people pleasing because then it can really lead to such an emotional burnout and feeling like, okay, I will abandon myself to keep you. But then there is no polarity, there is no attraction. And then the dynamics is one sided because the people pleaser will give a lot, overgive to the narcissist. And then the narcissist will just use it and abuse it. And it's not really good because also people pleasing completely disrupts self trust because then you don't really have trust towards yourself because you're constantly crossing your own boundaries for the sake of other persons. So there is a resentment that is built over time. And people pleasers often feel like unappreciated, misunderstood, taken for granted. But it's like, of course, because you never clearly say what you need and want. So how can you be understood and appreciated? And, like, how can your needs be met if you don't ever say what they are? Because sometimes, like, people pleasers don't even know what their needs are because they are so focused on the needs of others and they put themselves as the last priority. So then they don't even focus on spending time with themselves in order to discover what their center and their needs are. And I used to be like that. I used to be focused externally so much on other people and not on myself that I really needed to cut off from my friends and family for a while and just be with myself to discover who I am without the impact of anyone external to me. So there is this identity trap that people pleasers have because we are so attached to being a good person, to being nice, and we are like avoiding conflict at all costs, right? So yeah, we just don't want to be rejected. Don't want to be abandoned. We don't want to feel like we are too much. So then we just like disconnect from ourselves. And it's a very big cost to pay, actually, because yeah, all these effects like being emotionally burnt out, disconnected, attracting partners who are narcissistic, which I did, and the partners that actually take and without giving, and I used to overgive, because in my case it stemmed from the pattern in my childhood that I need to prove myself to my dad because he used to criticize me a lot. So then I felt like in my relationships I need to overgive, I need to please in order to gain men's love. And yeah, we also can feel like we are not going as deep in our intimacy as we could, right? Because we are not fully seen. And intimacy is into me see. So, like, if we are not showing ourselves truly and our truth truly, we are not really seen for who we are. So, how can we shift from people pleasing to being more self led? Well, first of all, we need to get to know ourselves on a deep level, spend some time with ourselves only, go for a week or month to the forest by yourself and just really discover who you are without any external influence, because oftentimes people pleasers are also very sensitive to the energies, opinions and emotions of others. So if you don't take time for yourself only, you might not discover what they are because you're constantly under the impact of other people telling you things, your family members, your friends, your partner, people who just want something from you, maybe expect something from you. So then you're trying to like meet their expectations, and even though they might not be what you want to do. So spending time with yourself is first thing. And then maybe shifting the internal dialogue from, okay, will I be liked? Would they like me? To something like, do I like how I feel with this person? And then rather than being like, oh, how do I keep this relationship, maybe asking this question of, is this relationship actually aligned with me and my truth, and am I truthful to myself in this relationship? So practically, what can we do? First of all, I recommend doing parts of a process with a part of you that is people pleaser and part of you that is narcissist, and have the conversation between them to resolve the conflict, because they are completely oppositional parts in all of us. Then also start noticing and asking, where do I say yes when I actually mean no in my life? And contemplating on this topic and checking when I say yes to things if it's actually true for me or not. And then practicing honesty. So rather than saying yes to everything, pausing, taking a breath, feeling into the body, checking if it's a yes or no, and saying, like, actually, I would prefer if we did this. And then, of course, we need to expect discomfort, because normally we are very comfortable saying yes to everything and avoiding conflict. But in this case, we need to just be okay with being uncomfortable, and also accept that when we start saying no to people that we usually said yes to, they are going to resist us, potentially reject us, potentially feeling hurt by us. And, because if for our whole life, let's say 30 plus years, we've been pleasing and saying yes to things that we didn't want to say yes to, and suddenly we say no, there is going to be resistance from people that are used to the old version of ourselves. So we need to also practice acceptance towards people being triggered by our new version of ourselves that is not going to please them anymore. And I've had it in my life before where I stopped saying yes to everything that other people wanted me to do. And suddenly I was perceived as this rebellious chick that, oh my God, now I'm so bad because I'm saying no to everything. And before I was just like so submissive and, doing what people wanted me to do. So I encountered massive resistance from my family members, especially, um, because I was a different person, right? And I wasn't this like sheep that was just follow, but I was just like, no, I'm gonna be a psychedelic sheep of my family, black sheep of my family, and say no to things that are not in alignment with me. And I had this situation, for example, where I had a conflict with my mom, where I didn't want to go to the funeral of my uncle. I just didn't feel this in my body. Like my whole body said no, and I didn't want to go. I didn't want to see my family, and I didn't want to do the funeral thing. And I had this massive fight with my mom, who was saying, oh, I disrespect family and whatever. But I'm like, no, I'm just not going to do it, because for my whole life, I would follow what my mom said to me. That was like 10 years ago, but still. Um, and she had also resistance to me saying no, right? To not be this nice girl all the time, good girl who's just doing whatever the parents or the family says. So it's a journey actually to get out of people pleasing. It's not that easy because people are going to resist you, and you have to accept it. And so, yeah, but regulating our body before speaking also very much helps. As I said, we can take a deep breath, we can ground, and yeah, we need to rewire this pattern. So discomfort is just like a part of it, you know? And yeah, so instead of saying, yeah, whatever, everything is fine, we finally need to say, hey, I actually don't want to do this, or I would prefer to do something else tonight. One more thing that I wanted to mention is that this dynamic of the parent treating the child as a doll also can stem from, you know, the parent's lack of self-esteem or feeling like, oh, only if I am a mother, I'm worthy because this is my role in life and so on. And then it's very much interlinked with enmeshment trauma that I'm going to talk about also in further episodes, because it's a big topic too, when you're so connected to your parent that you become like them and you really like merge with them. And then it's so hard to disconnect and to not live your life according to your parents' values. And when we see this pattern in our childhood, that we might have been treated like a doll rather than like a human with its own values, needs, desires, and so on, we can go into the childhood memories, the ones that caused this pattern, and rewire them. So we do it by feeling the emotion when we have this pattern coming up, people pleasing. For example, it could be, okay, I'm scared to express my truth because I'm scared that my partner will reject me or break up with me if I do that. And then we go into this fear of being rejected and track it back to the very first time, the original memory of when this pattern was created, resolve it there. So release all the emotional charge from this memory as if we were experiencing it from the first person perspective. And then in our nervous system, it's already encoded differently. So we are free of this pattern and our neurology is completely reprogrammed. And this is what I also do with my clients using the modality called the completion process, which is the trauma work, where we go back to all these original memories and reshape the experiences that created this people pleasing pattern in us. That's how I also healed my people pleasing pattern, by going into all these childhood traumas that shaped this I need to please kind of vibe in me. So to sum it up, people pleasing can protect connection, but completely destroy intimacy, because you cannot be deeply loved if you are not deeply known for who you are, for your truth, for your authenticity. So take off the masks, be yourself, because only then you will find someone who truly wants to be with you as you are, and not with your people pleaser vibe, which is only one part of you. That when you handle it, talk to it, and discover what's sitting there and why you're pleasing, it might be completely dissolved, and you might find yourself being okay with expressing your truth and your boundaries, and then creating the relationships based on the foundation of truth rather than lie. Because in this way, when you're pleasing and you're saying yes to something that you actually feel internally no to, this is kind of deception. It's a lie. So let's build our relationships on truth, whether it's romantic relationships or friendships or even business relationships, because this is the real value of how we can play it out, where we really find someone actually compatible with us, when we know ourselves on a level where we know our needs, desires, and this other person also knows their needs and desires. And if we can meet them mutually, that's where compatibility comes in. I was talking a lot about compatibility in my course, Unleash Your Power Couple Potential, that I have a link also below the YouTube and Spotify. So if you're interested, you can have a look there. And if you want to discover more about me, you can go to my website, karolinakuraj.com, Karolina with K, Kurij.com. And if you have any questions about this, or maybe you feel like you need support in reprogramming your people pleasing tendencies, or you feel like in your relationship dynamic, this narcissistic versus people pleasing patterns are coming up and you want to change it, then you can also write me at theconnectioncatalyst@gmail.com, and I will do my best to support you as much as I can. Thank you so much for being here with me. Have a lovely day, and send it to someone who needs to hear all of this about people pleasing, that might benefit from it, because it's really important topic. And in the next episode, I will talk about narcissism as well. So the other side of the spectrum of this. So hopefully see you or hear you or you listen to me next time.